On a hot spring afternoon, the asphalt glistened between the quiet streets of a residential neighborhood. A mother pushed a baby stroller under the shade of trees. Suddenly, the baby pointed insistently to a vacant lot filled with weeds and debris. She hesitated, but a faint whine drew her closer. Among twisted metal, a German shepherd was trapped, dirty, too weak to bark. The child extended a toy, and the dog tried to reach it. A neighbor arrived with tools. Across the street, a workhorse neighed and stomped on the hard ground. The dog whimpered. And what happens next? No one is ready to see. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and never miss one. Thanks for being with us. Now, back to our story. The spring heat in suburban Portland, Oregon, had begun to smother the usually pleasant atmosphere of Elmwood Heights. Sarah Wilson pushed her son's stroller along the shaded sidewalks, trying to catch whatever sparse breeze filtered through the maple trees lining the quiet streets. At 32, Sarah had the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to manage life's demands without complaint. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and despite the heat, there was a softness to her movements that spoke of the tenderness she reserved for her 10-month-old son, Ethan. The afternoon routine rarely varied. A gentle circuit around the neighborhood, the whisper of leaves mingling with distant traffic sounds and the comfortable silence of small, daily discoveries. Sarah had found these walks essential since becoming a single mother. They created a rhythm to her days that helped ground her when everything else felt uncertain. Today, however, something was different. Ethan, usually content to observe the world from his stroller with quiet curiosity, began squirming and pointing with unusual persistence. "What is it, buddy?" Sarah adjusted the stroller's canopy to block the sun from his eyes, thinking the brightness might be bothering him. But Ethan continued, his small arm extending towards something across the street. Sarah followed his gaze to a vacant lot she'd passed dozens of times without a second glance. Overgrown weeds and construction, debris from an abandoned project, created a small urban wilderness, the kind of space most adults trained themselves to overlook. But Ethan's attention remained fixed, his usually calm demeanor replaced by animated gestures. "You're certainly interested in something," Sarah murmured, hesitating at the curb. The day's heat made her reluctant to deviate from their shaded path, but Ethan's insistence was impossible to ignore. His soft babbling grew more urgent, his tiny finger pointing with surprising determination. With a sigh, Sarah checked for cars before crossing to the vacant lot. As they approached, she kept a cautious distance from the tangle of weeds and broken concrete. The fence surrounding the property had long since collapsed in several places, exposing rusted rebar and weathered wooden planks. "We'll just take a quick look, okay? But we're not going in there." She spoke in the gentle but firm voice she'd developed in her years working as a pediatric nurse at Providence Medical Center. That's when she heard it. A faint whimper, almost imperceptible beneath the ambient sounds of distant lawnmowers and passing cars. The sound came again, slightly louder, carrying a note of unmistakable distress. Sarah froze, her nurse's instincts immediately on alert. She scanned the debris-filled lot more carefully now, her eyes narrowing as she tried to locate the source of the sound. At first, nothing seemed out of place in the abandoned landscape, but then a slight movement caught her eye near a partially collapsed concrete structure. "Hello?" she called out, keeping one hand firmly on the stroller. "Is someone there?" Another whimper answered her, followed by a weak bark that confirmed her suspicion. An animal was trapped somewhere in that dangerous jumble of construction materials. Ethan bounced in his seat, his blue eyes wide with excitement as he continued pointing. For a moment, Sarah considered calling animal control and waiting safely on the sidewalk. It was the reasonable thing to do. She had Ethan to think about after all. But another pained whine decided the matter for her. Sarah secured the stroller, brake and crouched to look her son in the eyes. "Mommy needs to check something, okay? You stay right here where I can see you." She positioned the stroller at the safest spot near the sidewalk, close enough that she could reach it quickly, but far enough from the debris to keep Ethan secure. With careful steps, Sarah approached the collapsed structure. The scent of dust and neglect filled her nostrils as she peered around a fallen section of concrete wall. What she saw made her heart clench. A German shepherd lay trapped between twisted metal rods and chunks of concrete. The dog's coat was matted with dirt, its once proud stance reduced to desperate immobility. When it saw Sarah, the animal raised its head slightly, amber eyes reflecting exhaustion and wariness in equal measure. Sarah instinctively stepped back, her mind calculating risks. The dog was large and potentially dangerous, especially if injured and frightened, but those eyes, they held no aggression, only a tired plea that transcended species. "Hey there," she said softly, keeping her distance while assessing the situation. The dog was thoroughly pinned, one of its hind legs caught between metal bars in a way that made Sarah wince with professional sympathy. Any movement seemed to cause the animal pain, evident from the way it tensed when trying to shift position. A quick glance back confirmed Ethan was safe in his stroller, still watching with unusual intensity. When she turned back to the dog, Sarah noticed it was now looking past her, its gaze fixed on Ethan. The animal's ears had perked up slightly, and despite its precarious situation, its tail twitched in what might have been an attempt to wag. "You're stuck pretty bad, aren't you?" Sarah murmured, inching closer while maintaining a respectful distance. The German shepherd whined softly in response, as if confirming her assessment. Sarah pulled her phone from her pocket, ready to call for help, when a voice called out from behind her. "Everything okay over there?" She turned to see an older man approaching from the sidewalk, concern etched on his weathered face. He wore gardening gloves and carried pruning shears, suggesting he'd been working in one of the nearby yards. "There's a dog trapped in here," Sarah explained, gesturing toward the German shepherd. "It looks like it's been here for a while." The man, who introduced himself as Frank Henderson, set down his shears and came closer to examine the situation. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the precariously balanced debris. "That's a bad spot," he observed grimly. "Those rebar pieces could shift if we're not careful. Let me get some tools from my garage. I live just across the street." While Frank hurried to retrieve tools, Sarah returned to check on Ethan, who remained unusually focused on the trapped dog. She gave him a reassuring smile and handed him his favorite stuffed rabbit, which he promptly dropped over the side of the stroller. Sarah bent to retrieve it, but before she could, Ethan let out a determined babble and pointed again, this time more emphatically. The stuffed toy had landed in a patch of weeds just beyond the stroller. As Sarah picked it up, she noticed something, glinting in the sunlight, a worn metal tag half buried in the dirt. Curious, she brushed away the soil to reveal a military dog tag with the name Max stamped into the metal alongside a series of numbers. Frank returned carrying a crowbar, work gloves, and a small hydraulic jack. "This might help," he said, nodding toward the equipment, "but we need to be careful. That whole structure could come down if we don't do this right." They approached the trapped dog together, moving slowly to avoid startling the animal. The German shepherd watched them with wary hope, its breathing labored but steady. As they got closer, the precariousness of the situation became even more apparent. The concrete slab above the dog was supported by little more than the twisted rebar currently pinning the animal down. "If we move those metal pieces wrong, that whole thing might collapse further," Frank warned, pointing to the unstable structure. We need someone who knows what they're doing. As if on cue, a dark blue pickup truck slowed as it passed the vacant lot. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, rolled down his window and called out, "Need some help there?" Sarah felt a surge of relief as she recognized the Portland Fire Department logo on the man's t-shirt. "Yes, please," she called back. "There's a dog trapped under this debris." The man from the pickup truck introduced himself as Jason Reynolds, a firefighter who was off-duty, but immediately recognized the severity of the situation. His practiced eye assessed the precariously balanced debris as he approached the trapped German Shepherd. "How long has he been here?" Jason asked, crouching at a safe distance from the dog. "I'm not sure," Sarah replied, keeping one eye on Ethan in his stroller. "We just found him. My son pointed him out. I probably would have walked right past otherwise." Jason nodded thoughtfully, his expression shifting to professional focus. "Smart kid you've got there. This dog's in bad shape, but he's hanging in there." He turned to Frank. "Good thinking with the jack, but we'll need to be extremely careful. One wrong move, and that concrete slab could shift." Frank handed over his tools, stepping back to give Jason room to work. "I figured as much. That's why I was hesitant to try anything on my own." Sarah watched as Jason methodically assessed the situation, moving around the trapped animal with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to rescue operations. The German Shepherd's eyes followed him warily, but there was a glimmer of something like hope in the animal's gaze. "His back leg is the main problem," Jason explained, pointing to where a twisted piece of rebar had effectively pinned the dog in place. "But the real danger is that slab above him. If it shifts, we could make things much worse." A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by the unusual activity. Sarah noticed a woman approaching with a bottle of water and a towel. "I live just down the block," the woman explained, offering the items to Sarah. "Thought this might help. Poor thing must be dehydrated." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the water gratefully. Her nurse's training had already noted the signs of dehydration in the trapped animal, the sunken eyes and dry gums visible when the dog had panted briefly. Jason had removed his jacket and was now on his hands and knees, carefully examining the points where the concrete and metal trapped the German Shepherd. "I'm going to need something to stabilize this section before we try to free him," he muttered, more to himself than the others. "I've got some wooden beams in my garage that might work," Frank offered, "from my last deck project." "Perfect," Jason nodded. "And maybe a blanket or something soft we can slide under him once we get him free." While Frank hurried back to his house, Jason turned to Sarah. "What's your name?" "Sarah Wilson. And that's my son, Ethan," she replied, gesturing toward the stroller, where Ethan continued to watch the proceedings with unusual intensity for a baby his age. "Well, Sarah, I could use your help if you're willing. You mentioned you're a nurse." Jason had noticed the Providence Medical Center parking tag still hanging from her purse. "Pediatric nurse, yes," she confirmed. "Good enough. I need someone who won't panic if things get dicey. Think you can help stabilize the dog once we get this metal off him?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at Ethan. As if sensing her concern, the woman who had brought the water stepped forward. "I can watch your little one," she offered. "I'm Rebecca, by the way. I have 3 of my own, all grown now." After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded gratefully. She positioned Ethan's stroller where she could still see him clearly, then turned back to Jason. "Just tell me what to do." Frank returned with several wooden beams and an old moving blanket. Jason quickly organized the impromptu rescue team, giving clear instructions on how they would proceed. The plan was to stabilize the concrete slab first, then carefully free the dog's trapped leg without causing further injury. "On my count," Jason directed, positioning the hydraulic jack with precision. We need to create just enough space to slide these supports in. The tension in the air was palpable as the jack slowly raised the concrete fraction by fraction. Metal groaned in protest, and the German Shepherd whimpered softly when the pressure around his leg shifted. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, staying. Close enough to comfort the animal, but far enough to avoid startling him. "We're going to get you out of there." With each millimeter the jack created, Jason slid wooden supports into place, gradually building a stable structure to hold the weight of the concrete. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cooling afternoon air, his concentration absolute. "That's it," he finally said, sitting back on his heels. "The slab's secure enough now. Let's work on freeing that leg." Sarah moved closer as directed, ready to help stabilize the dog once it was freed. She noticed Ethan watching intently from his stroller, unusually quiet and focused. Typically active and vocal, her son seemed transfixed by the rescue operation unfolding before him. Jason worked methodically to create space around the trapped limb, speaking in low, calming tones to the German Shepherd throughout the process. "Almost there, buddy. You're doing great." The dog's eyes never left Jason's face, as if understanding every word. There was something profoundly intelligent in that gaze, not just animal awareness, but something deeper that Sarah couldn't quite name. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Jason finally announced, "I think we've got it. Sarah, be ready to help stabilize him when I lift this last piece." Sarah positioned herself as instructed, her hands steady despite the tension. With extreme care, Jason lifted the final piece of rebar, pinning the dog's leg. The German Shepherd let out a soft whine, but remained remarkably still, as if understanding the delicacy of the situation. "Now, slide the blanket under him. Gently," Jason directed. Together, they maneuvered the moving blanket beneath the freed animal. "Perfect. Let's ease him out of there." With painstaking care, they slid the German Shepherd from his concrete prison onto the blanket. Free from the debris at last, the dog attempted to stand but immediately collapsed, his weakened legs unable to support his weight. "Easy does it," Sarah soothed, her nurse's instincts taking over as she checked the animal for obvious injuries. The hind leg that had been trapped was clearly damaged, though not visibly broken. Dehydration had taken a severe toll, evident in the dog's sunken eyes and dry gums. Jason gently felt along the German Shepherd's ribcage, his touch professional, yet compassionate. "He's thin, but I don't feel any broken ribs. That leg needs attention, though, and he's definitely dehydrated." Sarah nodded in agreement, her mind already calculating the most urgent needs. "There's a veterinary clinic about 10 minutes from here on Burnside Street. I know the vet. Dr. Michaels has treated my friend's pets." "My truck's right there," Jason offered, nodding toward his blue pickup. "We can take him now if you'd like." A soft babble from the direction of the stroller drew everyone's attention. Ethan was leaning forward in his seat, hands outstretched toward the rescued dog, his face alight with fascination. The German Shepherd, despite his weakened state, lifted his head at the sound, ears perking up as his gaze locked with the baby's. Something unspoken passed between child and animal in that moment, a connection that seemed to transcend ordinary understanding. Sarah had seen many strange and wonderful things in her years of nursing, but the intensity of that silent exchange sent a shiver down her spine. Rebecca, who had been quietly watching over Ethan, remarked, "Well, would you look at that? It's like they know each other." The German Shepherd made another attempt to rise, this time managing to stay upright despite his obvious weakness. To everyone's surprise, he took a tentative step toward Ethan's stroller before his legs trembled and he sank back down onto the blanket. "I think he's trying to get to your son," Frank observed, his weathered face creased with wonder. Jason nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've seen working dogs with this kind of focus before. My cousin trains service animals. There's something special about this one. Sarah moved to check on Ethan, who was still reaching toward the dog with unusual persistence. As she approached the stroller, she noticed something clutched in her son's other hand, the metal dog tag she'd found earlier. "Where did you get that?" she asked softly, gently taking the tag from Ethan's grasp. Looking more closely now, she could make out the complete text, Max, PDSD 2017, followed by a series of numbers that looked like a service ID. "PDSD?" Jason asked, peering over her shoulder. "Post-traumatic stress disorder," Sarah translated automatically, her medical training kicking in. "I think this might be a service dog tag, but what's it doing here in this empty lot?" Jason carefully lifted the weakened German Shepherd, who now seemed content to be handled despite his earlier wariness. "Let's get him to the vet first. Maybe they can scan for a microchip. Most service dogs have them." Frank and Rebecca helped gather the rescue tools, while Sarah collected Ethan and his belongings. The small crowd that had gathered during the rescue began to disperse, though several people stopped to offer assistance or express concern for the dog. "Thank you all for your help," Sarah said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "We couldn't have done this without you." As Jason carefully placed the German Shepherd in the back seat of his extended cab truck, Sarah secured Ethan's car seat in the passenger side. The dog, despite his exhaustion, kept his eyes fixed on the baby, his focus unwavering even in his weakened state. "It's the strangest thing," Jason commented as he closed the truck door. "I've never seen a dog so fixated on a child before, especially one he's just met." Sarah buckled Ethan into his seat, her mind racing with questions. The metal tag weighed heavily in her pocket, its presence raising more questions than answers. As she climbed into the truck beside her son, the German Shepherd stretched his neck forward from the back seat, his nose almost touching Ethan's outstretched hand. "Max," Sarah whispered, testing the name from the tag. The dog's ears immediately perked up, his tired eyes suddenly alert. "Your name is Max, isn't it?" The veterinary clinic was mercifully quiet when they arrived. Dr. Michaels, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses, greeted them with the calm efficiency that came from decades of treating animals in distress. "Bring him straight back," she instructed after a quick assessment of Max's condition. "Lisa, prepare the examination room and set up an IV for fluids." The veterinary technician nodded and hurried ahead while Jason carefully carried the German Shepherd through to the examination room, the dog's eyes still somehow finding Ethan despite his weakened state. "You found him trapped in debris?" Dr. Michaels asked as she began her examination, her hands moving with gentle precision over Max's thin frame. Sarah nodded, bouncing Ethan gently on her hip as she explained the situation. He was pinned under concrete and rebar in that abandoned construction site on Maple Street. We're not sure how long he was there. Given his level of dehydration, I'd guess at least 2 days, possibly 3, Dr. Michaels said, her expression grave as she carefully examined the injured leg. "He's remarkably stoic for an animal in this condition. German Shepherds are tough, but this guy's exceptional." Sarah watched the examination with professional interest, recognizing the methodical approach from her own medical training. Jason stood nearby, his arms crossed, but his posture attentive, clearly invested in the outcome despite having met Max only an hour earlier. "The good news," Dr. Michaels announced after completing her initial assessment, "is that there are no broken bones. The leg has soft tissue damage and some moderate bruising, but with rest and proper care he should recover fully. The dehydration is our biggest concern right now." As Lisa set up the IV fluids, Dr. Michaels gently rolled Max onto his side to continue the examination. "He's microchipped," she noted, running a scanner over his shoulder. "Let's see who this handsome fellow belongs to." Sarah felt an unexpected tightness in her chest as she waited for the information. Part of her, a part she hadn't even realized existed until that moment, hoped the chip wouldn't reveal an owner eagerly searching for their lost pet. The thought surprised her. She'd never considered herself a dog person, and with Ethan to care for alone, the idea of adding a pet to her responsibilities should have been the last thing on her mind. Yet something about the way Max had connected with Ethan, that inexplicable focus and gentle awareness, had touched something deep within her. "Here we go," Dr. Michaels said, reading the information on her computer screen. "His registered name is indeed Max. He belongs to, or rather belonged to, Eleanor Summers. There's a phone number and address in the Selwood neighborhood." "Belonged to," Jason echoed, catching the past tense. Dr. Michaels nodded, her expression softening. "The system shows a note that Eleanor Summers passed away 3 months ago. There's a secondary contact, her granddaughter, Olivia Summers." Sarah shifted Ethan to her other hip, processing this information. "So he's been without a home for 3 months?" "Not necessarily," Dr. Michaels clarified. "The secondary contact may have taken him in. Let me call the number listed." While the veterinarian stepped out to make the call, Sarah sat in one of the plastic chairs against the wall, settling Ethan on her lap. The baby immediately turned to watch Max, who, despite the IV in his leg and his obvious exhaustion, kept his attention fixed on the child. "It's like they're having some kind of silent conversation," Jason observed, taking the seat beside them. Sarah nodded, watching the peculiar interaction. "I've never seen Ethan so focused on anything for this long. He's usually all over the place, typical 10-month-old curiosity." "Kids and dogs sometimes have connections we don't fully understand," Jason said, his voice thoughtful. "My sister's son was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. They got him a service dog, and the change was remarkable. It was like the dog understood things about him that even we couldn't grasp." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Michaels returned, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "I reached Olivia Summers. She's been looking for Max since her grandmother's funeral, when he ran off during the reception at the house. She's on her way now, should be here in about 20 minutes. Sarah felt that strange tightness in her chest again, a complicated emotion she couldn't quite name. Relief that Max would be reunited with family, certainly, but also an unexpected disappointment. She glanced at Jason and found him watching her with a perceptive gaze that suggested he understood exactly what she was feeling. "You did a good thing today," he said quietly. "Both of you," he added, gently tousling Ethan's fine hair. The baby giggled at the attention, but his eyes quickly returned to Max, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion and closed his eyes, though his ears still twitched at every sound Ethan made. Dr. Michaels completed her treatment, explaining that Max would need to stay overnight for observation and to receive the full course of fluids. "He's remarkably healthy otherwise, considering what he's been through. No signs of previous neglect. He was clearly well cared for before his misadventure. The tag we found suggests he might be a service dog," Sarah mentioned, pulling the metal dog tag from her pocket. "It has PDSD engraved on it along with his name." Dr. Michaels examined the tag with interest. "Post-traumatic stress disorder support dog. That would explain his exceptional temperament and focus. These dogs receive intensive training." The clinic door chimed, announcing a new arrival. A moment later, a young woman in her late 20s hurried into the examination room, her face flushed with emotion. "Max," she called, her voice breaking slightly. The German shepherd's eyes flew open at the familiar voice, his tail thumping weakly against the examination table. Olivia Summers rushed to his side, tears streaming freely down her face as she gently embraced the dog. "I thought I'd lost you forever," she whispered into his fur. "I've been putting up posters for weeks." Sarah watched the reunion with mixed emotions, Ethan squirming in her lap as if sensing the shift in the room's energy. The baby reached toward Max again, making the soft, babbling sounds that seemed reserved, specifically for the dog. Olivia noticed the gesture and turned toward Sarah and Ethan with tear-filled eyes. "Is this who found him?" "My son spotted him in that vacant lot," Sarah explained. "He wouldn't stop pointing at it until I went to look." A smile broke through Olivia's tears. Grandma always said Max had a special connection with children. He was her therapy dog after she came back from her final deployment. She served as an army nurse for almost 30 years. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. The military-style tag, the exceptional training, the dog's focused behavior. "Your grandmother had PTSD?" she asked gently. Olivia nodded, her hand never leaving Max's fur. From her time in combat zones, Max helped her through the worst of it. He's specially trained to recognize anxiety attacks before they happen, to provide pressure therapy, and to create space around her in crowds. Her voice softened. He gave her back her life. The room fell silent, except for the gentle beep of the monitoring equipment and Ethan's occasional soft sounds. Jason, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "He's a hero then, just like his owner." Olivia smiled gratefully at the recognition. "Yes, he is." Her expression shifted slightly as she glanced around the clinic room. "I should ask about the medical bills." "Already taken care of," Jason interjected before Sarah could speak. When she glanced at him in surprise, he simply shrugged. "The department has a fund for animal rescues. Seems fitting to use it for a veteran service dog." Dr. Michaels returned with paperwork for Olivia, explaining Max's condition and the care he would need over the coming weeks. "He should stay here tonight for the IV fluids and observation, but he can go home tomorrow if all looks well." Olivia's face fell slightly. "About that, I don't actually have him at my place. I've been looking for him since Grandma's funeral, but my apartment doesn't allow pets over 30 pounds. She looked down at Max, who was now resting more comfortably, the fluids already improving his condition. "I was planning to find him, a new home once I located him, somewhere he could use his training to help others." The admission hung in the air for a moment. Sarah felt Ethan wiggle in her arms, his attention still remarkably focused on the German Shepherd, despite the conversation swirling around them. "He seems pretty attached to your little one," Olivia observed, watching the silent communication between baby and dog. "It's unusual to see Max connect like that so quickly. Grandma said he could sense people who needed him." Sarah looked down at her son, then at Max, whose eyes had drifted open again to track Ethan's movements. The idea that had been forming in the back of her mind since the rescue suddenly crystallized with unexpected clarity. "What if?" she began, then paused, surprised by her own thoughts. "What if he stayed with us? Just temporarily," she added quickly, "until you find the right placement for him." The words were out before she could fully consider their implications. A single mother with a demanding job and a 10-month-old baby, volunteering to take in a large dog recovering from injury. It defied all practical logic. Yet something about the situation felt right, in a way Sarah couldn't explain. Jason raised an eyebrow but said nothing, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Dr. Michaels looked thoughtfully between Sarah and Max, her professional assessment evident in her gaze. "He would need a quiet place to recover," the veterinarian noted, "and someone who understands his needs as a service animal." "I'm a nurse," Sarah said, finding confidence in her. professional identity. I understand recovery protocols and medical care, and our house has a fenced yard. The practical details tumbled out as if making the case to herself as much as to the others. Olivia studied Sarah for a long moment, then looked at Ethan, who was now reaching toward Max with such determination that Sarah had to tighten her grip to prevent him from lunging forward. "Grandma would have liked you," Olivia said finally, a sad smile crossing her features. She always said Max knew best who needed him. She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card. "I travel a lot for work, which is part of why I can't keep him. But I'd like to stay in touch, to know how he's doing." Sarah accepted the card, a surprising sense of rightness settling over her. "Of course. And if it doesn't work out, or when you find the perfect permanent placement for him, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Olivia said, her expression suggesting she already suspected what the outcome might be. She turned back to Max, leaning close to whisper something in his ear that made his tail thump weakly against the table once more. Dr. Michaels cleared her throat gently. "If you're serious about this, Sarah, I'll need to go over Max's care instructions with you, and you'll need to pick up some supplies before he comes home tomorrow." Home. The word echoed in Sarah's mind with unexpected resonance. She looked at Jason, suddenly aware that this stranger had become woven into the day's events in a way that made his opinion matter. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. "Am I crazy to even consider this?" Jason's warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I think some of the best decisions look crazy on paper, but they feel right here." He tapped his chest. "Trust that feeling." The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting warm stripes across the tile floor where Max lay in watchful repose. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah had brought the German Shepherd home from the veterinary clinic, and already it was difficult to imagine their household without him. Sarah moved around the kitchen, preparing Ethan's breakfast, glancing occasionally at the dog, who had positioned himself precisely between the high chair and the counter where she worked. Every few seconds, Max's eyes would shift from Sarah to Ethan and back again, his vigilance never wavering despite his still recovering condition. "You know, for someone who wasn't a dog person, you've adapted pretty well," remarked Melanie, Sarah's closest friend and colleague from the pediatric ward, who had stopped by on her way to the hospital for the morning shift. Sarah smiled as she spooned pureed sweet potatoes into a small bowl. "I'm as surprised as anyone, but he's been amazing with Ethan. Watch this." As if on cue, Ethan dropped his teething ring from the high chair. Before it even hit the floor, Max was already moving, his injured leg still causing a slight limp as he retrieved the toy and gently placed it back on the high chair tray. Ethan squealed with delight, his small hands clapping at the familiar game. "That's uncanny," Melanie observed, sipping her coffee. "And he does this all the time?" "Constantly," Sarah confirmed. "Dr. Michaels says it's his service dog training. He's hardwired to anticipate needs and respond. But there's something else with Ethan, something I can't quite explain." Melanie set down her mug, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's not so mysterious. Dogs can sense things we can't. Changes in body chemistry, subtle behaviors. There are those seizure-alert dogs that can predict episodes before they happen." Sarah nodded, the observation aligning with thoughts she'd been having herself. "It's just remarkable how in tune they are." Last night, Ethan woke up fussing. Not even crying yet, just starting to stir, and Max was at my bedroom door before I even heard anything on the baby monitor. Free childcare," Melanie joked, though her eyes reflected genuine amazement. "How's his leg healing?" "Better every day. He has a follow-up with Dr. Michaels this afternoon." Sarah glanced at the clock. "Speaking of which, I should get moving if I'm going to make that appointment before my shift." Melanie stood to leave, gathering her purse and hospital ID badge. Let me know how it goes. And Sarah? She paused at the door, her expression softening. It's good to see you like this. You seem lighter somehow. After Melanie left, Sarah pondered her friend's observation as she cleaned up Ethan's breakfast mess. There was truth to it. Something had shifted in the household dynamic since Max's arrival. The constant undercurrent of tension she'd carried since becoming a single parent had eased, replaced by a strange new confidence. With Max's steady presence, the apartment felt less like a space she was managing alone and more like a home shared by a small but complete family unit. The thought brought with it a familiar pang, a reminder of the family she'd once imagined building with Ethan's father. David had seemed so certain, so committed during her pregnancy. Then, faced with the reality of a colicky newborn and the relentless demands of parenthood, he'd unraveled with stunning speed. By the time Ethan was 3 months old, David had retreated to his parents' home in Seattle, leaving behind apologetic text messages and child support payments that arrived with mechanical regularity but without personal notes. Sarah had adapted, as she always did. She'd rebuilt her life around Ethan's needs, restructured her nursing shifts, found reliable childcare, and constructed a new normal from the pieces left behind. She'd done it all with the efficient determination that defined her approach to life's challenges. What she hadn't expected was how Max would slot into their carefully balanced existence, not as another responsibility to manage, but as a supportive presence that somehow made everything else easier. The veterinary appointment went smoothly, with Dr. Michaels expressing pleasant surprise at Max's rapid recovery. His leg is healing beautifully, she noted, running expert hands along the formerly injured limb. And he's gained back almost all the weight he lost. You've done an excellent job with his care, Sarah. He makes it easy, Sarah replied, holding Ethan on her hip while the baby babbled happily at the sight of Max receiving attention. He takes his medication without fuss and actually seems to understand when I explain that he needs to rest. Dr. Michaels nodded knowingly. Service dogs like Max are selected for their intelligence and trained to an exceptional standard. Eleanor must have spent a small fortune on his training. She hesitated, then added, have you given any thought to what happens next? Has Olivia mentioned any potential permanent placements? The question sent an unexpected jolt through Sarah's chest. We've texted a few times. She mentioned a veterans support organization that might be interested, but nothing definite yet. I see. Dr. Michael's tone was carefully neutral. Well, there's no rush. He's clearly thriving in your care, and that's what matters most right now. As they were preparing to leave, the clinic door opened to admit a familiar figure. Jason Reynolds, the firefighter who had helped rescue Max, stood in the reception area with a surprised smile spreading across his face. Well, look who it is, he said, approaching them with the easy confidence Sarah remembered from their first meeting. I was just dropping off some supplies the station collected for the clinic. He crouched down to Max's level, offering his hand for the dog to sniff. Looking good, buddy. Much better than the last time I saw you. Max's tail wagged in recognition, though he remained positioned protectively close to Ethan. The baby squealed, with delight at seeing a new face reaching toward Jason with grabby hands. Someone's friendly today, Sarah laughed, adjusting her grip on Ethan. He's usually more reserved with strangers. Jason straightened up, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners. Must be my natural charm, or maybe he remembers me from the rescue. He hesitated, then added, I've been wondering how you all were doing. Thought about calling the vet to check, but figured that might be overstepping. There was something refreshingly direct about his manner that Sarah appreciated. No pretense, no carefully constructed facade, just honest interest. We're doing great, actually. Max has become an essential part of the household already. I can see that. Jason's gaze moved between them with perceptive warmth. He looks like he belongs with you. The simple observation resonated more deeply than Sarah expected. Before she could respond, her phone chimed with a calendar alert. I need to get going. My shift starts in an hour, and I still need to drop Ethan at daycare. Right, of course. Jason stepped back, but instead of saying goodbye, he asked, would it be okay if I called you sometime? Maybe we could grab coffee when you're not rushing between appointments? The unexpected question caught Sarah off guard. It had been so long since anyone had expressed that kind of interest that she momentarily struggled for a response. Dating had fallen completely off her radar since Ethan's birth, filed away under things to consider when life settles down, a time she privately suspected might never actually arrive. I'd like that, she found herself saying, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They exchanged numbers, and Sarah left the clinic with a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest that had nothing to do with her busy schedule or parenting responsibilities. It felt alarmingly like anticipation. Following week brought a steady rhythm of work shifts, childcare, routines, and Max's increasingly integrated presence in their lives. The German Shepherd had quickly learned Ethan's schedule, positioning himself by the front door 5 minutes before Sarah would normally prepare to leave for daycare drop-off, and settling by the window at precisely the time she usually returned home. On Thursday evening, Sarah found herself actually preparing for her coffee date with Jason. She'd arranged for Melanie to watch Ethan, an offer her friend had made with barely concealed excitement. An actual date with an actual adult human, Melanie had teased. This is groundbreaking development. It's just coffee, Sarah had protested, though she'd still found herself spending extra time choosing what to wear and applying makeup beyond her usual minimal routine. Max watched these preparations with curious attention, his head tilted slightly as if trying to understand the change in her behavior. When the doorbell rang, he positioned himself between the door and Ethan's play area, alert but not alarmed. Jason stood on the doorstep looking slightly less confident than Sarah remembered, a bouquet of simple yellow daisies in his hand. Too much? He asked, noticing her surprised expression. I debated this. Flowers for coffee might be overkill. The self-deprecating honesty made Sarah smile. They're perfect, actually. Daisies are my favorite. Lucky guess, he admitted with a grin. They seemed like you, bright but not showy. The coffee date extended into an early dinner, conversation flowing with unexpected ease. Jason told her about his 10 years with the Portland Fire Department, his close-knit family in Eastern Oregon, and his volunteer work with a program that brought therapy dogs to children's hospitals. That's actually how I recognized what Max might be when we found him, he explained over pasta at a small Italian restaurant near the coffee shop. I've worked with service dogs through the program. They have this focus, this awareness that's different from regular pets. Sarah found herself sharing more than she'd intended. The challenges of single parenthood, her complicated feelings about David's absence, and her unexpected bond with Max. He's changed things in ways I never expected, she admitted. It's like he filled a gap I didn't even know was there. Jason nodded thoughtfully. Some animals have that gift. My aunt had a therapy dog after her stroke. That dog knew exactly what she needed before any of us did. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah realized with a start that she hadn't checked. Her phone once hadn't felt that constant pull of divided attention that had become so normal she barely noticed it anymore. For a few hours, she'd been fully present, engaged in adult conversation that had nothing to do with medicine or childcare. I had a really good time, she said as Jason walked her to her car. Me too. He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to do this again. Maybe something that includes Ethan next time. There's a great dog park near Laurelhurst that has a playground adjacent to it. Max might enjoy it too." The thoughtful inclusion of both Ethan and Max in his planning touched Sarah more than a grander gesture might have. "I'd really like that." The weekend park date went even better than their first meeting. Ethan was fascinated by Jason, especially when the firefighter pushed him on the toddler swing, eliciting peals of laughter that drew smiles from other parents. Max stayed close, his behavior impeccable as he alternated between gentle play with other dogs and watchful attention to Ethan. "He never fully relaxes when Ethan's around, does he?" Jason observed, watching Max return from a brief game of fetch to position himself near the playground equipment. "Never," Sarah confirmed. "Dr. Michael says it's his training. He's always on duty when his person is present." "And Ethan is definitely his person," Jason noted with a smile. The observation lingered with Sarah long after the pleasant day concluded. As spring deepened into early summer, she found herself increasingly aware of how thoroughly Max had embedded himself in their lives, and how uncertain his future with them remained. Olivia Summers called on a warm Tuesday evening in June, just as Sarah was finishing Ethan's bedtime routine. Max had already taken his customary position at the foot of the crib, where he would remain until Sarah went to bed herself. "I think I found a permanent placement for Max," Olivia said after the usual pleasantries. "The Veterans Center has a client who needs a PTSD support dog. They're very interested in a trained dog like Max." The news about Max's potential placement hit Sarah with unexpected force. She sat on the edge of her bed after ending the call with Olivia, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. The logical part of her brain reminded her that this had always been the plan. Max was a highly trained service dog whose skills were needed by someone suffering from PTSD. It made perfect sense that he would go to a veteran who could benefit from his specialized training. Yet the thought of him leaving their home felt like a physical ache. In just over a month, the German Shepherd had become woven into the fabric of their daily lives in ways both obvious and subtle. His protective presence near Ethan, his watchful eyes tracking Sarah's movements around the apartment, the solid warmth of him beside the crib at night. These had all become essential parts of their family rhythm. Family. The word surfaced in her mind with startling clarity. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking of Max as a temporary visitor and started considering him part of their small family unit. From his position by Ethan's crib, Max watched her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every nuance of human emotion. Sarah sighed and patted the bed beside her, a gesture that Max immediately recognized as permission to join her. He jumped up with graceful precision, settling beside her with his head resting lightly against her. "Leg, what are we going to do?" she whispered, running her fingers through his thick fur. "Ethan's gonna miss you terribly. I'm going to miss you terribly." Max pressed closer, as if trying to offer comfort in the only way he could. The simple gesture broke something open inside her, and tears welled up unexpectedly. Sarah rarely allowed herself such moments of vulnerability, even in private. Since becoming a single mother, she had maintained a careful emotional equilibrium, not suppressing her feelings exactly, but keeping them neatly compartmentalized, where they wouldn't interfere with the practical demands of daily life. Now, with Max's warm presence beside her, those carefully maintained barriers seemed to dissolve. She cried quietly for what felt like a long time, for the family she'd thought she would have with David, for the challenges of raising Ethan alone, for the unexpected bond with a dog she was preparing to lose. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah felt strangely lighter. Max remained pressed against her side, a steady, calming presence. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she wiped her eyes before checking it. "Jason, Just wanted to say I had a great time at the lake yesterday. Ethan's going to be a swimmer in no time. Hope your shift wasn't too crazy today." The simple message brought a small smile to her face. Over the past weeks, Jason had become a regular presence in their lives, hiking together on her days off, bringing lunch to the park near the hospital during her break, teaching Ethan to feed ducks at the pond. There was an easy comfort to his company that Sarah found increasingly valuable. She texted back, "Shift was okay. Got some news about Max, though. They might have found him a permanent placement with a veteran." His response came quickly. "How do you feel about that?" The direct question was typical of Jason's approach. No platitudes or assumptions, just a sincere interest in her authentic response. Sarah appreciated it more than she could express. Conflicted. It's what's supposed to happen, but it's going to be really hard to let him go. "Jason, want some company? I'm off shift and just a few blocks away." Sarah glanced at the clock, nearly 10 p.m., and then at her tear-streaked face in the bedside mirror. The old Sarah would have politely declined, unwilling to be seen in such a vulnerable state. But something had shifted in recent weeks, a subtle relaxing of her need to appear perfectly in control at all times. That would be nice, actually. 20 minutes later, they sat on her small balcony, mugs of tea in hand, as Sarah explained Olivia's call and the proposed placement for Max, who had resumed his position by Ethan's crib after briefly greeting Jason. "The meeting with the veteran is scheduled for next Tuesday," she concluded. "If they connect well, Max could be placed by the end of the week." Jason was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful in the soft glow of the balcony lights. "You know," he finally said, "there might be another option worth considering." Sarah looked up, uncertain what he meant. Service dogs like Max are trained for specific conditions, but they're also incredibly adaptable. "Have you considered that maybe Max has already found his person? Or in this case, his people?" "What do you mean?" Jason set his mug down, leaning forward slightly. "I've been watching him with Ethan. That's not just a dog being friendly with a baby. There's something specific happening there, something I've seen before with my cousin's son and his service dog." Sarah frowned slightly. "Ethan doesn't have PTSD." "No, but service dogs are trained to respond to a wide range of physiological and emotional signals. My cousin's son has autism, and his dog can predict meltdowns before they happen, provide deep pressure therapy when he's overwhelmed, and alert the family when something's wrong." Jason paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've noticed Max does something similar with Ethan. He seems to know what Ethan needs before either of you do." The observation resonated with Sarah's own unspoken thoughts. She had noticed Max's uncanny ability to predict Ethan's needs, positioning himself by the high chair moments before Ethan would begin fussing for a meal, bringing toys just as boredom set in, alerting Sarah to wake-ups before the baby monitor caught the first sounds. "I thought it was just good training," she said slowly. "It's more than that. The night of the storm last week when the thunder was so bad." Max positioned himself over Ethan in the crib before the first thunderclap even hit, not beside him, over him like a shield. That's a specific protective position these dogs are taught. Sarah remembered that night clearly, how Max had pressed his body gently over Ethan's, creating a living weighted blanket that had kept the baby sleeping peacefully through the worst of the storm. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, though she thought she already knew. "I'm suggesting that maybe there's a reason Max connected so strongly with Ethan from the beginning. Maybe he senses something we don't." Jason hesitated, then added, "Have you ever had Ethan tested for sensory processing issues?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "No, I mean, he's developing normally. His pediatrician hasn't noticed anything concerning. I'm not suggesting there's something wrong, Jason clarified quickly. But children with even mild sensory sensitivities can benefit enormously from a service dog's stabilizing presence. My sister says her son's anxiety levels dropped by half once they got Baxter. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't previously considered. Ethan had always been sensitive to certain textures and sounds, more easily overwhelmed by crowded spaces and loud environments than other babies his age. She had attributed it to his temperament, but now she found herself wondering if there might be more to it. So you think Max somehow knows Ethan needs him specifically? Jason shrugged. I think it's worth exploring before you agree to place him elsewhere. These dogs have instincts we don't fully understand. Eleanor Summers was a veteran with PTSD, but maybe Max's training allows him to respond to other types of needs as well. The conversation with Jason planted a seed that grew over the following days. Sarah began researching service dogs for children with sensory processing differences, finding countless stories of transformative relationships between sensitive children and specially trained dogs. She watched Max more closely, noting the specific ways he seemed to anticipate and respond to Ethan's needs. On Monday morning, she called Olivia Summers. I've been thinking about Max's placement, she began, her heart racing slightly with the significance of what she was about to propose. Before you move forward with the Veterans Center, I wanted to discuss another possibility. Olivia listened without interruption as Sarah explained her observations of Max's relationship with Ethan, the research she'd done, and her growing conviction that there might be a reason beyond coincidence for their connection. I'd like to formally adopt Max, she concluded, not as a pet, but as a service dog for Ethan. I believe there's something he's responding to in my son that we haven't fully identified yet. There was a long pause before Olivia responded. I had a feeling this might happen, she said, with no trace of surprise in her voice. When Grandma was in the hospital near the end, she told me something I've been thinking about a lot lately. She said Max would know where he needed to be next and that I should trust his choice. What are you saying? I'm saying I think Grandma would approve. Olivia's voice softened. She believed these dogs have a wisdom we can't always understand. When I saw how quickly Max bonded with your son that day at the vet's office, I wondered if this might be what she meant. Relief washed over Sarah with unexpected force. So, you're okay with us adopting him permanently? More than okay. I think it's exactly what should happen. Olivia paused. But I would like to ask for one thing in return. Of course, anything. I'd like to visit occasionally. Grandma was my only family, and Max is my last connection to her. Absolutely, Sarah agreed immediately. You're welcome anytime. Max is part of our family now, which makes you family, too. After ending the call, Sarah sat for a long moment processing what had just happened. The certainty she felt about keeping Max surprised her, a clarity of purpose she hadn't experienced since deciding to keep going with her nursing degree, despite her pregnancy with Ethan. To confirm her intuition, Sarah scheduled an appointment with a developmental specialist who worked with sensory-sensitive children. Dr. Abigail Chen observed Ethan and Max together, her experienced eyes noting the subtle interactions between them. While I wouldn't diagnose Ethan with a processing disorder at this age, she explained afterward, he does show signs of sensory sensitivity, particularly to auditory stimuli and certain textures. It's quite remarkable how the dog responds to his discomfort before it becomes apparent to us. So you think there's merit to keeping Max as Ethan's service dog? Sarah asked. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. I've seen tremendous benefits for sensitive children who have appropriately trained dogs. They provide a consistent, calming presence that helps regulate the nervous system. The fact that Max already demonstrates these behaviors without specific training for this purpose is quite extraordinary. Armed with this professional validation, Sarah moved forward with the formal adoption process. Olivia helped with the paperwork to transfer Max's registration, and Dr. Michaels provided documentation supporting his role as a service animal for Ethan. The evening after finalizing the adoption, Sarah invited Jason over for dinner to share the news. As she prepared a simple pasta dish, she watched him playing with Ethan on the living room floor, Max lying contentedly nearby, alert but relaxed in the presence of this man who had become a steady fixture in their lives. The scene stirred something deep within her, a vision of possibility she had stopped allowing herself to imagine after David left. Not a replacement for what had been lost, but something new and unexpected. A family formed not through traditional paths, but through a series of remarkable connections. Over dinner, after Ethan had been put to bed with Max in his customary position by the crib, Sarah shared everything she'd learned from Dr. Chen about sensory sensitivity and the role service dogs could play. She thinks Ethan might benefit from occupational therapy as he gets older, but for now, Max is providing exactly the support he needs, she explained. It's like he instinctively knows how to help Ethan regulate when things get overwhelming. Jason listened intently, his expression warm with understanding. I'm not surprised. From that first day in the vacant lot, there was something special happening between them. He reached across the table to take her hand. I'm really happy for you, Sarah, for all of you. The simple touch sent a current of warmth through her. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she admitted. Finding Max, learning about service dogs, understanding what might be happening with Ethan, you've been there every step of the way. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, Jason said simply. Later that night, after Jason had gone home with plans to take them all hiking that weekend, Sarah stood in the doorway of Ethan's room, watching her son sleep peacefully, with Max beside the crib. The German Shepherd lifted his head at her presence, those intelligent eyes regarding her with calm awareness. You knew all along, didn't you? She whispered. You knew Ethan needed you. Max tilted his head slightly, in that gesture that always made Sarah feel he understood far more than anyone gave him credit for. In the soft glow of the nightlight, she could almost imagine Eleanor Summers, the army nurse who had found healing through this remarkable animal, nodding in approval at the new purpose he had found. Sarah thought about the strange series of events that had led them to this moment. If Ethan hadn't pointed so insistently at that vacant lot, if she hadn't followed his lead, if Jason hadn't driven by at exactly the right moment. So many coincidences that perhaps weren't coincidences at all. Some connections happened before you could explain them, she had realized. Some bonds formed not through careful planning, but through the mysterious alignment of need and answer, of wound and healing, of emptiness and fulfillment. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood in the backyard of the small house they had recently purchased, a home with a fenced yard that Max patrolled with dignified purpose and enough space for Ethan's growing collection of toys. Jason worked nearby, building a playset he had designed specifically to accommodate both Ethan's developing motor skills and Max's protective supervision. Olivia Summers sat on the patio, smiling as she watched Ethan toddle across the grass with Max at his side, the dog matching his pace perfectly to the child's uncertain steps. When Ethan stumbled slightly, Max was there immediately, providing a steady support for the boy to regain his balance. Grandma would have loved this, Olivia remarked. She always said Max had more purpose in him than just helping her, like he was meant for something important. He was, Sarah agreed, watching as her son patted the dog's head with delighted giggles. He was meant to find us. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner, together, a family ritual that had evolved naturally as Jason spent more and more time in their home, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all together. "I was thinking," Jason said, interrupting her thoughts as he chopped vegetables beside her. "The department's family picnic is next weekend. I'd like you all to come, you, Ethan and Max." The casual invitation carried weight beyond its simple words. The official acknowledgement of what they had become to each other, not quite defined yet, but undeniably a unit. "We'd love to," Sarah replied, feeling that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. As if sensing the significance of the moment, Max appeared in the kitchen doorway, his posture alert but calm. Ethan followed close behind, his small hand resting on the dog's back for balance. The sight of them together, so perfectly attuned to each other's movements, still amazed Sarah daily. "You know," Jason said, his voice soft with wonder, as he watched them, "in all my years with the fire department, I've seen some remarkable rescues. But I think that day in the vacant lot might have been the most important one of my career." Sarah smiled, understanding completely what he meant. "I'm not sure who rescued whom," she said, watching as Ethan settled on the floor beside Max, the dog curling protectively around him, "but I'm grateful every day that we found each other." Outside, the autumn sun cast long golden shadows across their backyard. Inside, the kitchen filled with the warmth of cooking and conversation, of a family formed not through conventional paths, but through a series of extraordinary connections. At the center of it all lay Max, the German shepherd, who had somehow known exactly where he needed to be. Some bonds, Sarah had learned, were formed long before we understand them, written somewhere in the mysterious language of instinct and need, of perfect timing and second chances. And sometimes the greatest acts of rescue happen not in dramatic moments of crisis, but in the quiet recognition of what we can be to each other if we simply pay attention to the silent wisdom of those who see what we cannot yet see. Dear listeners, we hope you've been moved by Sarah, Ethan, and Max's journey of unexpected connections and second chances. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist of equally touching narratives. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexity and the remarkable bonds that can form when we least expect them. What unexpected connections have shaped your life? We're waiting to hear your stories in the comments.